Hello, so today we're going to be talking about conditions for rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. So I have a little chart here. So it kind of tells you the order of things, so it's like a little flow chart. So quadrilateral, that's any shape that has four sides. Doesn't matter what it looks like, it just has to have four sides. That's how we name a quadrilateral. Parallelograms are a type of quadrilateral, but they have certain characteristics. So we talked about this the last couple lessons. So again, if you don't know what a parallelogram is, write this stuff down. Pause the video and write down what I'm about to say. So parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Opposite angles are congruent, consecutive angles are supplementary. Rectangles and rhombuses are types of parallelograms. So they have all the same characteristics of a parallelogram, but rectangles have all 90-degree angles. Rhombuses just have all congruent sides. A square is a type of rectangle and a type of rhombus. So it has all the characteristics of all of these things. So all sides are congruent, all angles are 90 degrees, opposite sides are parallel, and so on. Trapezoid is a type of quadrilateral. Now a trapezoid just has one pair, only one pair of parallel lines, parallel sides. One pair of parallel sides, so that's important to know. Isosceles trapezoid is just like an isosceles triangle, except it's a trapezoid. So it means these two sides are congruent. We'll talk about this. Those two angles are congruent, and these two angles are congruent. So we'll talk about that more next lesson. And then a kite is a type of quadrilateral as well. These two sides are going to be congruent to each other, and then these two sides are congruent as well. So getting into the notes here, name all the special parallelograms that have each property. So all the types of parallelograms that have diagonals that are perpendicular. So I've written some other notes to help us figure out what these are. So if the diagonals are perpendicular, then that means all side lengths have to be congruent. So the only two things that have all side lengths congruent are rhombuses and squares. For part B, diagonals have to be congruent. So if the diagonals are congruent, the only way that can happen is if all angles are 90 degrees. So the only two shapes we know that have all angles are 90 degrees are rectangles and squares. For part C, diagonals are angle bisectors. So for the diagonals to be bisecting each angle they touch, that means all side lengths have to be congruent. So the only two shapes that we know that are like that are rhombuses and squares. Part D, diagonals bisect each other. So if the two diagonals bisect each other, that means the opposite sides have to be parallel. So all the shapes that we know with the opposite sides being parallel, well, that's square, rhombus, parallelogram, and I'm missing one, rectangle. So all of those have diagonals that bisect each other. And then finally part E, diagonals are perpendicular bisectors of each other. So that means all lengths have to be congruent if the diagonals are perpendicular and they bisect each other. So that would be a square and a rhombus. So this was a short lesson, but I know it's going to be hard to remember all these things, but try to remember as much as you can because this is going to be helpful when you're trying to figure out different problems in the rest of this unit.